Fire. Inspector Edward Hauser stood in the basement of Our Lady of the Angels School on October the 23rd, 1958, exactly 39 days before the fire. His report noted inadequate exits, no sprinkler system, wiring that belonged in a museum, not a school. He checked the box. Compliance required. The building burned in December 1958. Those 39 days meant everything. But this wasn't the first warning. It wasn't even the 10th. And what happened in those crucial weeks between inspection and inferno reveals something far more disturbing than simple oversight. It exposes a system where children's lives were weighed against renovation budgets, where religious exemptions trumped safety codes, and where everyone from the fire marshal to the archdiocese knew exactly what could happen. We'll explore how the Catholic school exemption came to exist, why the fire department's hands were tied, what the teachers knew but couldn't say, and how 92 children became the price of bureaucratic delay. 1,600 students attended Our Lady of the Angels on December 1st, 1958. By 2:45 that afternoon, the school had become a furnace. By 3:30, it was a crime scene. But the real story begins years earlier, in the quiet compromises and deferred maintenance that made this tragedy inevitable. Later, we'll examine the specific failures, the open stairwells that became chimneys, the single fire escape that served 1,600 children, the alarm system that depended on someone pulling a box 3 blocks away. Each decision seemed reasonable at the time. Each one proved fatal. This is the anatomy of preventable disaster. The building itself was a relic. Constructed in 1910, the original north wing had been expanded multiple times over nearly 5 decades. By 1958, it sprawled across Iowa Street and Avers Avenue on Chicago's west side, a 2.5-story brick structure that looked solid from the outside, deceptively solid. The exterior was brick. Everything inside was wood. Stairs made of wood. Walls made of wood, floors made of wood, doors made of wood, roof made of wood. The floors had been waxed and re-waxed so many times with petroleum-based products that they were essentially soaked in flammable material. Every surface in the building could burn, and burn fast. But technically, the school was legal. In 1949, Chicago had updated its fire safety codes for schools. The new standards required sprinkler systems in all new construction, required fire-resistant stairwells, required fire doors on the 2nd floor, required alarms connected directly to the fire department. But there was a catch, a grandfather clause. Schools built before 1949 didn't have to comply. Our Lady of the Angels was built in 1910, renovated in 1921, expanded in 1939, and again in 1951, but never brought up to current code, because legally they didn't have to. The building had passed inspection in October 1958, because inspectors could only check whether the building met the standards it was required to meet, not the standards that might actually keep children safe. This grandfather clause existed because compliance was expensive. Retrofitting older buildings with sprinklers cost thousands of dollars per classroom. Installing fire doors, enclosing stairwells, replacing wooden construction with fire-resistant materials. The costs added up quickly. The Archdiocese of Chicago operated dozens of parish schools. Most were old buildings with the same deficiencies. We'll return to why this exemption existed and who fought to maintain it. The school served a tight-knit Italian and Eastern European immigrant community, 1,600 children, kindergarten through 8th grade, 24 classrooms, most holding 55 to 60 students each. The school was perpetually overcrowded. Children hung their coats on hooks in the hallways because there were no metal lockers. Fire extinguishers were mounted 7 feet from the floor, too high for most adults to reach without a stool, specifically to prevent students from tampering with them. Each classroom had a glass transom above the door. These provided ventilation. They also provided a perfect pathway for smoke and flame once the glass shattered from heat. The school had 1 fire escape. 1 for 1,600 children. Located in the annex near the end of the north wing, it required students to enter the main corridor first. If that corridor filled with smoke, the fire escape became useless. The building had no automatic fire alarm, no smoke detectors. Those wouldn't be commercially available until 1969. No heat detectors, no alarm connected to the fire department. The manual alarm boxes were inside the building. Someone had to notice the fire, stay calm enough to find an alarm box, pull it, and hope that it worked. Then, someone had to run outside and find the nearest street alarm box 3 blocks away. This was the system in place to protect 1,600 children. Later, we'll walk through exactly how this system failed on December 1st. The Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary taught at Our Lady of the Angels. They were devoted teachers, many having served the parish for decades. Sister Mary St. Canny Sling taught 7th grade in room 211. Sister Mary Seraphica Kelly taught 5th grade in room 212. Sister Mary Clare. Therese Champagne taught another section. These 3 nuns would die with their students. The sisters knew the building's hazards. Teachers had complained about the wiring, about the crowded conditions, about the single fire escape, but they were not building managers, not fire marshals, not code inspectors. They taught. They trusted that those responsible for building safety were doing their jobs. That trust was misplaced. On Monday, December 1st, 1958, Chicago experienced a cold but sunny winter day, the Monday after Thanksgiving. Students were restless, still thinking about the holiday weekend. Teachers were pushing through the afternoon, counting down the final 20 minutes until dismissal at 2:45. Somewhere between 2 o'clock and 2:20, a fire started in the basement. The exact cause remains officially undetermined. Investigators found a trash barrel at the bottom of the northeast stairwell in the basement. The fire likely started there. In 1962, a former student confessed to setting the fire, then recanted. A judge ruled him not responsible. The case remains technically open, but whether started by a match, electrical short, or spontaneous combustion, the location mattered more than the cause. The trash barrel sat at the base of an open wooden stairwell. For 20 to 40 minutes, the fire smoldered undetected. The basement was dim, poorly lit. The custodians were elsewhere in the building. No smoke detectors existed to sound an alarm. The fire grew slowly, feeding on trash, then the wooden stairs themselves, building heat and pressure in the enclosed basement space. Around 2:35, a window in the basement shattered from heat. Fresh air blasted into the space. the fire exploded. Flames raced up the northeast stairwell like a chimney. A thick wooden door on the first-floor landing, closed but not fire-rated, blocked the smoke from entering the first-floor corridor. That door saved every child on the first floor, but the second floor had no fire door, nothing between the stairwell and the hallway. We'll trace the path of that smoke in a moment. At 2:39, a fifth-grade student in the annex noticed smoke in a stairwell and told his teacher. At 2:40, students in several classrooms began smelling smoke. Teachers opened doors to investigate. Some saw grey smoke drifting through the hallways. Sister Mary St. Canice in room 211 noticed the smell. She opened her door. Smoke was already filling the corridor. She closed the door and ordered her students to stay calm. At 2:42, someone finally pulled the fire alarm. The bells rang. But by then, the second-floor north wing was already filling with toxic smoke. The delay in detection, the 20 to 40 minutes the fire burned unnoticed, had stolen the time needed for orderly evacuation. At 2:42, a still alarm was telephoned to the Chicago Fire Department. In Chicago, a still alarm brought one engine, one truck, one squad, and a battalion chief. Engine 85 was dispatched from the firehouse at Division Street and Homan Avenue. They were told to respond to the rectory address at 3808 West Iowa Street. The school was at 909 North Overs Avenue, around the corner. Later, we'll examine how this misdirection cost crucial minutes. Engine 85 arrived at 2:44. Battalion Chief Miles Devine saw smoke pouring from the school, not the rectory. He immediately radioed for more equipment and began directing his men to the building. But they'd lost 2 minutes repositioning trucks and hose lines. By 2:45, the second-floor north wing was a death trap. The open stairwell had functioned exactly like a chimney. Hot gases and smoke poured up from the basement, past the closed first-floor door, and exploded into the second-floor hallway. The heat was intense enough to melt the linoleum floor tiles. Glass transoms above classroom doors shattered. Smoke and superheated gases poured into the rooms. 5 classrooms bore the brunt. Rooms 209, 210, 211, 212, and 213. In room 209, Sister Mary Davidis Devine ordered students to push desks and books against the doors to block smoke. The tactic worked. Most of her students survived. 2 died, including the last child in the room, Beverly Burder, who passed out from smoke inhalation just before rescuers reached her. In room 210, panic erupted. Students rushed to the windows. The windows faced south, overlooking a courtyard surrounded on 3 sides by the school and on the 4th by a 7-foot iron picket fence. The gate in that fence was locked to prevent vandalism. Firefighters arriving at the scene saw children at those windows. They grabbed ladders and ran toward the courtyard. The locked gate blocked them. They spent 2 valuable minutes battering it with sledgehammers and a ladder before finally smashing through it with a fire truck. Children were jumping by then. The second-floor windows were 25 feet above ground because the school had a raised basement. 25 feet is equivalent to a 3rd story in most buildings. Children jumped anyway. Some firefighters caught them in safety nets. Some landed on hard ground. Many were injured. Some died from the falls. Others died in the smoke-filled classrooms before they could reach the windows. In room 211, Sister Mary St. Canis never made it to the windows. She was found dead, her body draped over several students, attempting to shield them to the end. Of 55 students in her classroom, 48 died. In room 212, Sister Mary Seraphica Kelly suffered the same fate. Nearly her entire class perished. In room 213, Sister Mary Clare Therese Champagne died trying to organize evacuation. Later we'll discuss what these rooms looked like after the fire. Firefighters arrived in force within 6 minutes of the alarm. More than 200 firefighters from 22 engine companies, 7 ladder companies, and 10 squad companies responded. But they were too late. The fire had been burning for 40 minutes. The second floor was an inferno. They rescued more than 160 children from the burning building. Many were already dead. Some bodies were so badly burned they broke apart when firefighters tried to lift them. Hal Bruno, a newspaper reporter who was also a volunteer firefighter with Rescue Squad 2, was among the first responders. He later wrote about entering the building, about the bodies, about the textbook way the fire had spread up that open stairwell, about how everything they needed to prevent this tragedy had been known for decades. We'll examine that knowledge shortly. 87 children and 3 nuns died on December 1st, 1958. 3 more children died before Christmas. 2 more died in 1959, the last one on August 9th. Final death toll, 92 children and 3 nuns. 95 people. The city of Chicago mourned. Mayor Richard J. Daley ordered flags lowered to half-staff. The Chicago American newspaper devoted its entire front page on December 5th to photographs of the deceased children under the headline, "Chicago Mourns." Life magazine featured the tragedy in its December 15th issue, including the now iconic photograph of firefighter Richard Scheidt carrying the body of 10-year-old John Michael Jakowski Jr. Pope John XXIII sent condolences from the Vatican. At the Cook County morgue, parents identified their children. Some bodies were too badly burned for visual identification. Father Joe Ognebeen attempted to comfort grieving families, moving from parent to parent in scenes of unimaginable horror. The Archdiocese of Chicago faced immediate scrutiny. How had this happened? Why wasn't the building up to code? Who was responsible? The National Fire Protection Association launched an investigation. Their report, released in January 1959, was scathing. Authors Chester Babcock and Rexford Wilson blamed civic authorities and the Archdiocese for failing to recognize their life safety obligations in housing children in structures which are fire traps. The report noted every deficiency. No sprinklers, no fire doors on the second floor, open stairwells, highly combustible interior construction, inadequate exit capacity, glass transoms that provided pathways for smoke, fire extinguishers mounted too high to reach, no direct alarm to the fire department. Later, we'll examine the exact wording of this condemnation. Percy Bugbee, president of the NFPA, was asked what lessons had been learned from the fire. His answer became famous. There are no new lessons to be learned from this fire, only old lessons that tragically went unheeded. Everything needed to prevent the Our Lady of the Angels fire had been known for decades. Enclosed stairwells prevented fire spread. Everyone knew this. Fire doors contained smoke and flames. Everyone knew this. Sprinkler systems suppressed fires before they became uncontrollable. Everyone knew this. Heat detectors provided early warning. Everyone knew this. The knowledge existed. The technology existed. The codes existed for buildings constructed after 1949. The political will to enforce those standards on older buildings did not exist. Chicago. Fire Commissioner Robert Quinn argued that the principal cause of death was the delayed alarm. If firefighters had been notified at 2:15 instead of 2:42, they might have saved more children. He wasn't wrong. The delay was catastrophic. But the NFPA report noted that even with immediate notification, inadequate exits would have caused deaths. The truth was uncomfortable. Multiple failures combined to create disaster. Delayed detection allowed the fire to grow uncontrolled. The open stairwell funneled smoke and flame directly to occupied classrooms. The lack of fire doors allowed rapid smoke spread. The locked courtyard gate delayed ladder placement. The single fire escape for 1,600 students was absurdly inadequate. The grandfather clause exempted the school from modern safety standards. Any one of these failures, corrected, might have prevented mass casualties. All of them together guaranteed it. Later, we'll discuss what happened after the fire. Within days, investigators swarmed Chicago schools. The Chicago American newspaper sent reporters to document fire hazards. They found dozens of schools with the same deficiencies as Our Lady of the Angels. Some blatantly violated existing codes. Others hid behind grandfather clauses. School officials loudly proclaimed they would spend money to improve safety, enclose stairwells, install sprinklers, add fire doors, connect alarms to fire departments. The promises were loud and public. Implementation was slow and incomplete. A year after the fire, a follow-up investigation found that only 400 of 1,040 Chicago schools required to install sprinklers had actually done so. Budget constraints, officials said. Logistical challenges, competing priorities. The children buried in cemeteries across Chicago might have had different priorities. But nationally, change came faster. The NFPA revised its building exit code, later renamed the Life Safety Code, to address school fire safety comprehensively. 16,500 older school buildings across the United States were brought up to code within 1 year of the disaster. 68% of all U.S. communities implemented fire safety improvements after Our Lady of the Angels. Fire drills increased in frequency. Alarm boxes were installed in front of schools. Interior alarms were connected to street alarm boxes. Sprinklers became standard in critical facilities. Fire doors became mandatory. Enclosed stairwells became standard. The NFPA credited the lessons from Our Lady of the Angels with saving countless lives. Since 1958, no school fire in the United States has killed more than 10 people. 95 people died to teach lessons that were already known. Let's examine the grandfather clause in detail. Why did it exist? Who benefited from it? Who lobbied to maintain it? In 1949, when Chicago updated its fire codes, building owners and institutions lobbied against retroactive requirements. The cost of bringing thousands of older buildings up to new standards would be enormous, they argued. It would bankrupt schools, force closures, put teachers out of work. The compromise was the grandfather clause. New construction had to meet new standards. Existing buildings only had to meet the standards in effect when they were built. This seemed reasonable, practical, politically acceptable, but it created a two-tiered system. Children in new schools were protected by modern safety features. Children in old schools were protected by 1910 standards, or 1920 standards, or no standards at all, if the building predated formal codes. Our Lady of the Angels fell into this gap. Built in 1910, legally compliant with 1958 codes because of the grandfather clause. Practically, a fire trap waiting for a spark. Catholic schools had additional protection. The Archdiocese of Chicago operated dozens of parish schools. They wielded significant political influence. When fire codes were debated, archdiocesan representatives argued that strict enforcement would force school closures. Thousands of children would lose access to Catholic education. Parish communities would be devastated. Politicians listened. The grandfather clause remained. This isn't speculation. This is documented in city council records, in fire department memos, in archdiocese correspondence. The lobbying happened. The exemptions were granted. The consequences were predicted but ignored. Later, we'll examine specific warnings that went unheeded. Fire Inspector Edward Houser's October the 23rd inspection wasn't the first warning about Our Lady of the Angels. The school had been inspected multiple times over the years. Each time, inspectors noted the wooden construction, the open stairwells, the lack of fire doors, the absence of sprinklers. Each time, they checked boxes indicating the school met its legal requirements under the grandfather clause. But informally, firefighters knew the school was dangerous. They knew most of Chicago's older schools were dangerous. Battalion chiefs had discussed worst-case scenarios. What would happen if fire broke out in a crowded school during classes? How many children could they save with current response times and equipment? The answers to those questions weren't encouraging. After the fire, firefighters spoke quietly about buildings they'd known were hazardous. Schools they'd prayed would never burn. Our Lady of the Angels was one of many. It just happened to be the one where luck ran out. The teachers knew too. The nuns at Our Lady of the Angels had complained about conditions. The wiring was old. Occasionally, they smelled burning insulation. The building was overcrowded. Fire drills were held, but evacuating 1,600 children through inadequate exits took too long. But what could teachers do? They didn't control budgets, didn't make building decisions, didn't write fire codes. They taught. They trusted that those with authority and resources would keep the building safe. That trust was betrayed. The parents knew. Not in detail, perhaps, but they could see the building was old, could see the crowded classrooms, could see the single fire escape. Some parents had expressed concerns to school administrators. Others assumed that if the building passed inspections, it must be safe. After the fire, parents would learn that inspections only verified legal compliance, not actual safety. We'll examine the lawsuits that followed. The Archdiocese of Chicago faced immediate legal liability. Wrongful death lawsuits were filed on behalf of the deceased children. Injury lawsuits were filed by survivors and their families. The Archdiocese settled most claims, ultimately paying approximately $3 million. $3 million sounds like a lot, until you divide it among 95 dead and hundreds injured. Until you calculate the cost of installing sprinklers and fire doors before the fire, which would have been a fraction of that amount. The monetary settlements couldn't restore lost lives, couldn't give parents back their children, couldn't erase the trauma experienced by survivors. But they did establish legal precedent. Building owners and institutions could be held financially responsible for inadequate fire safety, even if buildings met minimal code requirements. Later, we'll discuss the long-term impact on fire codes nationwide. In the aftermath of Our Lady of the Angels, the concept of code compliance fundamentally changed. Before 1958, compliance meant meeting whatever standards existed when a building was constructed. After 1958, the expectation shifted. Buildings were expected to provide reasonable safety, even if technically grandfathered. The Life Safety Code evolved to reflect this. Retroactive requirements became more common. Grandfather clauses were narrowed. Exceptions required specific justification. Buildings serving vulnerable populations, schools, nursing homes, hospitals faced stricter standards. By 1970, most states required sprinklers in all schools regardless of construction date. Enclosed stairwells became mandatory. Fire alarm systems had to connect directly to fire departments. Building materials had to meet flame spread ratings. Our Lady of the Angels was demolished shortly after the fire. A new school, built with steel and concrete, with sprinklers and enclosed stairwells and modern alarm systems, opened in 1960. It served the parish until 1999, when enrollment had declined and the Archdiocese closed the school. The site later housed a charter school. Then, the mission of Our Lady of the Angels, operating a food pantry and community services. In 2020, a group of union firefighters and sprinkler fitters donated and installed a modern sprinkler system in the building. 62 years after the fire, finally, the memorial to the victims stands near the site. 95 names etched in stone. 92 children, 3 nuns, ages 7 to 14, 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, 8th graders, students who were learning vocabulary words and math problems and history lessons when smoke filled their classrooms. We'll discuss some of the victims now. Beverly Burder, 10 years old, 5th grade, room 209. She nearly made it. Was the last student remaining in the classroom when the roof collapsed. Smoke inhalation. Valerie Thomas survived the initial fire with severe burns covering more than 65% of her body. Fought for 3 months. Died March 5th, 1959. John Michael Tchaikovsky, Jr. 10 years old, his body was carried from the building by firefighter Richard Scheidt in the photograph that became the symbol of the tragedy. Mark Stachura. Died August 9th, 1959. 8 months after the fire, the last victim. The hospital tried everything, including an artificial kidney, the only one available in Chicago. Nothing worked. Sister Mary St. Canice Ling, 28 years old, 7 years teaching, died shielding her students. Found with her body draped over children she tried to protect. Sister Mary Seraphica Kelly, 42 years old, 19 years teaching, died in room 212 with most of her students. Sister Mary Claire, Therese Champagne, 53 years old, multiple decades teaching, died attempting to organize evacuation. These are just a few names, 95 people, each with families, friends, futures stolen by preventable disaster. Later, we'll examine survivor testimonies. Serge Ocheta was a 7th grader in room 209. He escaped down a ladder with a janitor's help. He later recalled the tragedy spreading throughout the neighborhood. It wasn't just a tragedy for the parish. It was a tragedy for the neighborhood. Every street lost a kid. Some streets lost 2 or 3. It affected everybody on the block. Survivors carried trauma for decades. Many suffered survivor's guilt. Why did I escape when others didn't? Many developed anxiety around fires. Some couldn't enter enclosed buildings without panic. Support groups formed. Reunions were held. Memorials dedicated. In 1985, survivors gathered for a 25th anniversary commemoration. In 2008, for the 50th anniversary. In 2018, for the 60th. Each time, the numbers dwindled. Time claims everyone. The firefighters who responded carried their own trauma. Hal Bruno never forgot entering that building, never forgot the bodies, never forgot that everything needed to prevent the disaster had been known decades earlier. When he later became a prominent political journalist with ABC News, he kept a photograph from Our Lady of the Angels in his office. A reminder. Richard Scheidt, the firefighter photographed carrying John Michael Jakowski's body, rarely spoke about that day. The image followed him for decades. People recognized him, asked about it. He gave brief answers. The memory was too painful. Later, we'll discuss the broader implications for fire safety science. Our Lady of the Angels became a case study. Fire science programs studied it. Firefighter training academies analyzed it. Building code committees referenced it. The lessons were dissected in excruciating detail. The chimney effect in the open stairwell, how fire spreads vertically through unenclosed shafts. The flashover in the second-floor hallway, how accumulated heat and smoke ignited simultaneously. The toxic gases, carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, how synthetic materials in the building produced deadly fumes. The survival times, how long children could survive in smoke-filled rooms, how quickly incapacitation occurred. Every detail studied, analyzed, used to improve codes and training. The Los Angeles Fire Department produced a documentary, Our Obligation Was, dramatizing a similar school fire. They stated the school in the film wasn't supposed to be Our Lady of the Angels, but details were identical. The film was used for training nationwide. It showed exactly what happened when schools lacked proper fire protection. We'll conclude with Percy Bugby's warning. There are no new lessons to be learned from this fire, only old lessons that tragically went unheeded. Those words echo across 67 years. They apply beyond fire safety. They apply to every preventable disaster. Every time we know the risks but fail to act. Every time budget concerns outweigh safety. Every time grandfather clauses protect property over people. Our Lady of the Angels didn't happen because of ignorance. It happened despite knowledge. The fire codes existed, the technology existed, the understanding existed. The political will did not exist. Not until 95 people died. Fire Inspector Edward Hauser stood in that basement 39 days before the fire and noted deficiencies. He couldn't require fixes because of the grandfather clause. He filed his report and moved on to the next inspection. What else could he do? The sisters who died with their students probably knew the building was unsafe, but they showed up every day, taught their classes, trusted that someone, somewhere, was protecting them. That trust was misplaced. The parents who sent their children to school on December 1st, 1958, expected them to come home. 92 families had that expectation shattered. And the lesson? The lesson is that we knew, we always knew. The warnings were given, the reports were filed, the deficiencies were documented, and nothing happened. Until it did. Until children died. Until it was too late. Today, when you walk into a school and see sprinkler heads in the ceiling, fire doors in the stairwells, alarm systems connected to fire departments, remember why they're there. Remember 95 people who died because those things weren't there. Remember that every safety code is written in blood. Remember that grandfather clauses can kill. Our Lady of the Angels taught us that legal compliance doesn't equal safety, that institutional inertia costs lives, that the most vulnerable pay the price for bureaucratic failure. We knew it could burn. We knew how to prevent it. We chose not to act. Until December 1st, 1958, when the price of inaction became 95 funerals, they knew. And they did nothing. Until the children burned.